Creationists don't understand geology. I don't just mean they don't understand the science of geology, because that much is self-evident. Anyone who thinks the Earth is 6,000 years old and that modern parakeets and velociraptors inhabited the planet at the same time has no clue as to what they're talking about in terms of geologic time. No, I mean they don't understand geology, why it exists, and how it started. If you listen to a young earther and have them explain to you the history of the science of geology, you'll hear a narrative of evil, atheistic scientists desperately trying to disprove the Bible and making up a bunch of data in order to do so. The truth is, the reason why geologists understood that the Earth is older than described in the Bible is because they were honest. They were also Christians, at least mostly. The first ever geologic survey was begun in 1799, way before Charles Darwin's time, by a man named William Smith. He was the first to recognize that rock layers were organized in such a way as they could be identified by the types of fossils found within them, and that certain fossil assemblages could only be found in particular rock layers, thus indicating that the layers were not laid down all at once and were instead laid down in different time periods. This was foundational to the science of geology, as Smith's work clearly demonstrated that the Earth had ages, not a singular age starting 6,000 years ago. Note that this was the late 17 and early 1800s, and every scientist of the day in England, which was Smith's home, was a Christian, not some angry atheist trying to disprove the Bible. Smith and his contemporaries didn't know why there were different layers of strata containing animals that appeared simple at the lowest layers, getting gradually more complex as one moved higher up the geologic column, but they could clearly see that this was the case. Although they were Christian, they were also honest and couldn't simply deny evidence that they were witnessing firsthand, which is far more than can be said for young Earth creationists today. Smith still believed in creation, as did later scientists like Adam Sedgwick and Richard Owen, but they had to admit that the creation wasn't 6,000 years ago, and that dinosaurs and people did not live at the same time. That brings me to Owen. If you spend any time listening to creationists, they like to spin this idea that Owen was one of them, a fiery opponent to Darwin's theory of evolution. And he was, but only specifically Darwin's theory of evolution. You see, Darwin was a proponent of evolution by natural selection, but there are or were other proposed means of evolution. What creationists won't tell you is that even in the deeply religious 19th century, no, or rather very few scientists believed that the Bible's account of creation was at all accurate. To them, the story in Genesis was metaphorical at best, and the reason they believed this was because all geological evidence they could see ran exactly counter to a young Earth with a single geologic age. Owen believed that there were various geologic periods on the Earth, reaching back perhaps millions of years, and that each successive age was brought about either by God creating new animals to represent each stage, or, later in his life, some other means of non-supernatural development. In other words, evolution. And there are countless scientists, all independently, coming to this conclusion that the Earth was old at that time. Georges Cuvier understood clearly that the Earth was much older than the few thousand years accounted for in the Bible. Now, I know someone out there is going to say, well, Cuvier wasn't an evolutionist. To that I say, true enough. But that was because at the time, Darwin's work had yet to be published. Remember, Origin of the Species was published in the 1850s, while Cuvier kicked the bucket in the 1830s. Yet, even while being at the time unconvinced of evolution, he was convinced of long ages and an ancient Earth. Why? Because he was an honest scientist who couldn't just ignore factual reality. Cuvier was a Christian, of that there is no doubt. But he mostly kept his religiosity in private, where it belonged. In the scientific field of geology and paleontology, Cuvier is largely the reason why we understand that extinction exists, something that the hyper-religious, the Young Earth Creationists of his day, scoffed at. Now, Cuvier believed that mass extinctions were the entire reason for the geologic column, and that massive global flooding events were responsible for the fossil record. But take note, he isn't just talking about the biblical flood. In his mind, that flood would have just been one of many heralding the arrival of the present age. Due to the relative scant nature of the known fossil record, Cuvier remained unconvinced of evolution, but he was dead certain, and correct, that the Earth was older than the dates given in the Bible. He knew this while still maintaining his sincere religious beliefs, but he would not allow those beliefs to override the physical, factual data that he was observing in the real world. He was a scientist, and as such, his worldview had to be painted by the evidence that he had in front of him. At the time, this meant that he was a catastrophist. Catastrophism is the belief that present-day geology can only be explained by massive catastrophic events like floods and massive earthquakes. But eventually, this model of geology was replaced with uniformitarianism, which was eventually modified to become a combination of the two. Creationists claim to be catastrophists, but this isn't true, not based on the definition of that belief as it was understood by scientists who had adopted it. Remember, Cuvier did not believe in the literal biblical timeline, yet he was a catastrophist. They simply believed that present-day geology, like mountain ranges, were formed in rapid events which took place in only days, weeks, months, or years, not millions of years. They believed the formation of the planet's geology was quick, but that the Earth was still very old. Those who held to the belief that the Noachian flood was to be blamed for all of Earth's geology were ridiculed even during those highly religious times. It was James Hutton who did the first serious work into uniformitarianism. Through over 20 years of examination of geological processes, his work indicated that it took a long time for things like mountains and canyons to form through processes of downcutting and uplift. He was among the first to posit that the rock cycle was fueled by a hot inner core, and that the geological processes we witness today more or less occurred at the same rate as the past. This is vitally important for reasons that even creationists should find obvious. If, for instance, continental drift or plate tectonics could suddenly and rapidly change speed and direction as their belief would necessitate, then tomorrow morning the North American continent could suddenly accelerate towards Asia at a high rate of speed, colliding with that continent with such force as to cause the immediate extinction of all life on both continents. Sound ridiculous? Well, that's what creationists believe happened during the Noachian flood in the Bible. They believe that Pangaea, the former supercontinent, broke up and zoomed to their present locations in only 40 days and nights. Remember that in the present, the tectonic plates move at the same rate that your fingernails grow. Talk about rapid deceleration. They believe that for some magical reason, the continents slowed down to the rate they move now near instantly, which is even more remarkable because, to quote Jeremy Clarkson, speed has never killed anyone. Suddenly becoming stationary, well, that's what gets you. Rather than adopt this chaotic and unpredictable view of nature, scientists, real ones, understood that they could measure and observe the changes taking place on the planet. We can see continents being split apart in real time. We can witness the Pacific Ocean shrinking and the Atlantic growing. This is uniformitarianism. But pure uniformitarianism wasn't the answer either. Catastrophes do happen. Volcanoes can erupt and completely alter landscapes. We know this because we've witnessed it. Asteroids can impact the planet and wipe out entire ecosystems, as happened to the non-avian dinosaurs and countless other animals at the end of the age of reptiles. We know this because we've observed impacts on other planets and can see craters left behind on the moon and on our own world. The truth is, based on the facts, that the world gradually changes over long ages thanks to the rock cycle and plate tectonics, with occasional massive disasters causing extinction events. Creationists want you to think that the science of geology was a part of some great war against the Bible. But this can't be true because a majority of the great geologists and paleontologists of the 18th and 19th centuries were all Christians. Why would they attempt to undermine their own beliefs? The fact is, they weren't. They held their religious beliefs without, wouldn't you know it, allowing those personal views to interfere with their observations of nature. It was a well-understood fact in science that the Earth was older than the biblical 6,000 years, well before Darwin, before carbon dating, before evolution was even understood. Young Earthers are being dishonest with you when they tell you that scientists like Richard Owen or George Cuvier was one of them. They are lying, or, perhaps more charitably, they just don't understand geology.